19 September 1944, near Arracourt, Lorraine. Fog sits low on the beet fields, a grey lid over hedgerows and shallow folds of earth. Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division waits in dispersed hull-down scrapes while Cole Bruce Clarke listens to clipped reports. Far off, the sound of track pins and idling Maybachs, then the faint clank of a Panther easing through wet ruts. Lieutenant Cole Creighton Abrams has the 37th Tank Battalion edged along a hedgerow, guns laid, engines ticking at idle, crews speaking in short, level phrases. Artillery coordinates are already walked in on the crossroads beyond the shallow rise. A forward observer whispers a correction. The Fire Direction Center answers once. Clarke's order is simple and cold. Let them come into the pocket, then move and shoot. The fog helps both, and neither hiding the American silhouettes, smothering the German fieldcraft, compressing space until the first tank that breaks the veil becomes the point of a spear with no shaft behind it. A Panther noses out of the mist, turret hunting. Commander upright in his cupola. Another shadows its right track, and a third looms behind, all of them angling toward the road that cuts across the fields. Abrams gives a half-second burst on the net. Sherman's rise just enough to clear the berm. The first shot slams the lead Panther's glacis and ricochets long. The second angles in at the mantlet seam. The German tank lurches, stops, and burns with a dry whoomph that the fog swallows almost at once. The brigade tries to fan left, but the hedgerow is already empty. The American line has slid 30 yards along the cover. A timed concentration lands behind the Panthers, metal rain chasing the drivers forward into the same pocket they have not seen. Another Sherman group rakes the flank as loaders slam in fresh rounds, as gunners nudge, traverse, and call range in steady tones that never rise. The shooting stops as quickly as it began. Smoke crawls low across the field. A turret ticks as its steel cools. Wind moves through the beet leaves and the hedgerow, and nothing else speaks. 25 July 1944 Saint Louis sector, Normandy. Operation Cobra opens with a concentrated airstrike. The front peels, and the German line that had absorbed weeks of attrition fractures along sunken lanes and hedgerows. The breach is not a tidy corridor. It is a widening seam where American columns can move before the enemy can reset fields of fire. The outcome that matters is a road net suddenly within reach of fast formations. 1 August 1944, Avranches, Pontaubault. At noon, Third Army stands up under George S. Patton. Military police turn the bridge at Pontaubault into a metronome of rolling steel, one-way flow enforced. Columns push south and pivoted east without pause. The point is not to clear every village. It is to outrun German demolition teams and seize junctions that make strong points irrelevant. XII Corps, under Manton Eddy, and XX Corps, under Walton Walker, distribute tasks by lanes, cut, bypass, envelop. The faster unit decides where the next fight happens. 7 August 1944. Avranches break out to Brittany, and the lower Seine approaches. German rearguards try to stitch a line with fuel they do not have and radios they cannot keep powered. American armored spearheads set a pattern. Recon screens find the road that matters. Engineers lift a culvert or jam a bypass. Tanks and armored infantry slide around the village that looks dangerous and take the bridge behind it instead. Where a German battalion expects to trade shots, it is left pointed at silence while its supply route burns. Late August 1944 Northern France lines of communication. Red Ball Express begins hauling on 25 August, giving speed a fuel line. The tempo is arithmetic. More gallons forward per night equals more. Early September 1944. Moselle crossings. Nancy. XIC Corps identifies crossings along the Moselle and stages bridging assets forward under cover of night and morning fog. The 80th Infantry Division fixes the near bank. Engineers drop spans at Duluard. 4th Armored Division pushes through the gap before German artillery can walk fires onto the pontoons. The fall of Nancy is not fireworks. It is a sequence completed at speed. Reconnaissance locates the seam. Infantry holds the door open. Armor is through the same day. German headquarters pulls new Panzer Brigades into Lorraine to restore a line. The ground favors long fields of fire and deliberate anti-tank work but only if the defender is set in time. Mid-September, 1944, Lorraine weather approach to Arracourt. Morning fog collapses the air picture and compresses battles into hedgerow edges, orchard lines, and low rises. Patton's directive is constant. Keep moving, force contact on terms of choice. Cole Bruce Clarke's Combat Command A of 4th Armored Division practices it at company scale. Post hull down, fire first, displace 30 to 50 yards, repost, repeat. Never let the enemy range a position that still holds a tank. Lieutenant Cole Creighton Abrams keeps 37th Tank Battalion on short bounds, sliding laterally to turn a frontal probe into a flank shot. German columns feel their way west and south, with Panthers at the nose and crews that have not yet learned to fight blind. 19 September, 1944, Luneville Arracourt opening blows. Gen. Hasso von Manteuffel commits 111th Panzer Brigade to cut into the American salients and roll them back across the Moselle. The plan assumes time on target and coordinated thrusts. The fog and American movement deny both. Panther platoons enter pockets where artillery con. 2023. September, 1944, German persistence, American transition, 113th Panzer Brigade and elements of 11th Panzer Division try again along the Arracourt arc, shifting axes to find an open seam. Each thrust meets a defense that refuses to be stationary. American tank infantry teams trade space in meters for angles in seconds. When a Panther crests with the right silhouette, artillery lands on the road behind it, not the hull in front. When German guns acquire a berm, the vehicles are already 30 yards to the left. The tactical picture is not dominated by better armor or thicker plates. It is decided by who relocates faster after the first exchange. 29 September, 1944. Counterblows falter, salients hold. German formations remain dangerous in every minute they can assemble, but assembly itself becomes the fight. Without fuel margins and with radio discipline strained, the brigades cannot sustain a tempo that fits the plan on paper. CCA's companies spread thin, keep the schedule tight. Daylight contact, immediate displacement, night rearm, pre-dawn resets. The Moselle crossings behind them continue to feed forward. Red Ball Express keeps the priority battalions alive, with gasoline measured to the hour. The defense that breaks is not shattered in a single duel. It is fractured by a dozen short moves that make enemy maps false by midday. The stakes through each step are exact and aligned with the title's claim. Speed chooses ground before German staffs can. Mobility turns terrain into a tool rather than a wall. When Patton's armored commands reach bridges first, towns fall without street fights. When company commanders displace after every burst, German gunners hit where Americans no longer are. When fuel arrives at the rate the front consumes it, tempo stays American. In Lorraine, this did not make the war end. It made German day. 19 September, 1944. The fields near Arracourt lie under a lid of fog that makes distance collapse and sound carry. A Panther platoon advances by guesswork along a farm track, commanders straining from cupolas, antennas beaded with moisture. They have armor and a gun that rules open country at range, but the country is not open and the range is gone. Across the hedgerow, American tanks sit hull down behind a beat berm, engines at idle, radios tight with short acknowledgments. The first Sherman raises enough to clear its gun, sends a round that hammers the German lead tank into a halt, and drops back as a paired tank slides into the next firing angle. Artillery, pre-plotted onto the crossroads behind the Panthers, arrives a breath later. The German crews aim for the muzzle flashes they just saw. When the sights settle, the American positions are empty, and the next flashes come from 30 yards left. The exchange is not about thicker plate or longer barrels. It is about who moves after the first shot and who still thinks he can stand where he just fired. The German brigades committed to Lorraine carry strength on paper that should have counted. Panthers with high-velocity guns, stout glacis, and good optics are built to break lines that resist in place. But the brigades are new, crews short on time together, and reconnaissance thin. They shape their approach around roads, villages, and ridge crests they can locate in low visibility, which means they arrive where an opponent who practice short bounds and hull-down gunnery wants them to arrive. Morning by morning, the fog strips away the long-range advantage and forces every fight into mid-range angles, where a tank caught in turn or pivot shows a rectangle of side armor larger than its confidence allows. American tank companies in Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division rise to the same light with different habits. Company commanders post platoons on reverse slopes and thin hedges, select 2 or 3 fallback scrapes per gun, and drill a cycle that never lasts long enough for German gunners to register a solution. A gunner calls range, a loader shoves home, a commander counts down a displacement while the shot is still traveling. When the round hits and dust blooms, the driver already crawls to the next cut in the hedge. The vertical stabilizer on the Shermans is not magic, but on short bounds it saves seconds that become angles, and angles become survival. Radios bind the whole act together. The platoon that has just fired falls silent, while a sister platoon takes the net and the shot, keeping the German sight pictures old by the time they are drawn. 20 September south of Luneville, a German thrust tries a different lane, nose to the hedgerow that fronts a low orchard. The Panthers push hard across the open, hoping to crest fast enough to find American positions still settling. Instead, a Sherman section slides laterally along the orchard edge, turning a frontal threat into a flank opportunity measured in 3 tree trunks worth of lateral movement. The first American round rakes the side of the lead tank. The second forces the wingman to swing its turret with a speed that is fine on paper and too slow inside a fog bank where the target has already shifted. The return shot smashes the hedgerow that no longer holds a hull. Behind the German point, a road junction takes a timed artillery concentration, intended not to kill the tank already hit, but to strip away the next 30 seconds of German organization. On 22 September, the tempo rises. The Germans assemble Panther groups again along a village lane and push through, confident that shock gained by mass will buy them the ground needed to deploy. The lane leads to a shallow bowl, already measured by American forward observers the day before. The first Panthers crest the lip, take fire from positions A and B, and return within a heartbeat. Then those positions go quiet while position C speaks, and the bowl's far rim walks with bursting shells that trap the following vehicles in the approach. The pattern repeats at a second bowl north of the road. Americans never hold long enough to be ranged. Germans never see enough of a stationary target to build a rhythm. What reads as superior accuracy at the scale of one tank duel reads as superior procedure at the scale of a company day. The technology on each side is not dismissed. It is forced to operate under terms it did not prefer. The Panther's long gun outclasses a 75mm Sherman across a kilometer of clear air. Lorraine offers half that distance and hides half of that behind contour and fog. The Sherman's armor is not proof against a square hit. The company practice there is to invite no square hits, to show little and never twice in the same place. German crews, new to their brigades, need clean sightlines to exploit the strength they carry. Instead, they receive angles that hide silhouettes and expose flanks. German radios carry authority forward. American radios distribute permission downward. One method depends on a plan holding together. The other assumes the plan will be rewritten by the next hedgerow. A platoon in the 37th Tank Battalion offers the simplest example of how small margins turn into outcomes. They occupy a spur that commands a shallow draw. The order is to discourage anything that tries the draw and not to be seen doing it twice from the same rut. They fire 2 rounds, fall back 5 lengths, fire 1, slide left under the cover of a hedgerow, and hold fire while the sister platoon takes the next engagement. The movement seems minor, but it resets the German problem from firing solution to target discovery all over again, and this reset consumes seconds the attackers cannot spare. When the German battalion commander calls for his regimental guns to stamp the draw flat, the shells land on where the Shermans were, not where they are, because the intervening voice traffic is already tangled by the effort to rescue a point platoon whose lead tank is smoking in the low ground. By 24-26 September, attempts to restore momentum lean harder on numbers at the nose of each thrust. Elements of a veteran division join the fight, and the brigades try to align axes. Each push is real. Every time a Panther appears through the fog, it remains a machine that can kill from a bad angle with a single shot. But assembly itself becomes the fight. Fuel is metered to marches and not to rallies. Waypoints change as American companies refuse to be pinned. The result is that when German tanks finally crest in strength, They crest onto an American defense that is fresh at the firing positions, topped off from a supply line that kept to schedule, and already marked on a map whose artillery calls were rehearsed before dawn. Numbers matter because they compress or extend the window in which procedure can be executed. A company that displaces 30 yards and reloads on a timetable measured in seconds keeps a corridor of safety around itself. A battalion that resupplies by midnight and resets firing positions before the first bank of fog lifts keeps that corridor alive into the next day. The other side, if it arrives 5 minutes late at a bridge or a crossroads or a ridge saddle, meets a geometry of fields and hedges that no longer matches its map. Crews that have not trained to rebuild formation under fire become single tanks fighting single duels against opponents who make their duels brief and uneven. None of this says that the American tanks were harder to kill in absolute terms. It says they were harder to find, fix, and finish under the conditions that actually existed. None of it claims that the German armor was weak. It shows that the armor's strength was not allowed to act at the distances and tempos it required. The ground, the fog, the nets, the gunnery drills, the practiced short-bound, all of these turned the question from which tank is stronger to which company can still move after it fires. When the fights compressed to ranges where flanks could be made in a heartbeat and angles, it's won the first minute. The side that treated movement as part of the shot owned the next field and the next. When speed turns a map into a trap, armor thickness stops mattering. Engines idle in a long metallic hum that runs over the river like a cable. Military police wave columns through with firm, practiced motions, palms slicing the air, voices kept low to preserve the rhythm. A Sherman crew waits 2 vehicles back from the bridge. The commander keeps one glove on the turret rim, watching the white armband of the traffic sergeant come and go like a metronome. The driver stares down the glacis, heel hovering over the accelerator. The gunner murmurs a checklist to himself, not because anyone needs to hear it, but because routines make time predictable. The order arrives across the net in 8 words, calm and unadorned. The tank rolls. The bridge thuds once under the weight, again on the far bank, and then the column exhales into open road. The point is motion. The next choke point belongs to whoever reaches it first and does not stop. Night on the Red Ball route, late August. Canvas trucks move like dim beads on a string, each headlamp hooded, each driver counting distances by telephone poles, and the brief, blessed squares of light that leak from barns as farmers step out to listen. A pair of mechanics sits on a fender at a forward refuel site, hands black with fuel stains that never come off, watching gauges while a corporal chalks times on a board. The convoy pulls in, and the work happens without speech. The tank company, waiting just beyond a hedgerow, sees the glow of cigarettes extinguish one by one as drivers slide back into their seats. A loader in that company's lead tank sets 3 76mm rounds where his hand expects to find them. He checks the intercom plug, taps the breech with a knuckle, and leans back into the turret wall. Somewhere behind him, the entire theater rearranges itself so that his company can keep moving after dawn. Early September, the Moselle near Nancy. Fog sifts across the river and rests on the near bank. Engineers kneel over decking and pin steel to steel with quick, sharp blows. A forward observer lies on the slope above the crossing with a range book open and a pencil ticking in small strokes. The net is spare. One voice to place smoke, one to report the far bank clear, one to call the armor forward. A tank eases onto the bridge. Its driver looks only at the deck, left hand feeding gentle inputs to keep the track true. On the far side, the armored infantry has already taken the first row of houses, and the streets behind them ring with orders that sound more like measurements than speech. A bridge in place is not a trophy. It is a corridor to the next decision. 18 September, the field southeast of Arracourt. The night has left dew on the beet leaves, and the mist sits heavy as a ceiling too low to reach. In a Sherman, the commander keeps his head inside the hatch because the droplets on the periscope are easier to manage than the blindness of a cupola in fog. He hears a soft click as the stabilizer engages. The gunner keeps the reticle on a hedgerow cut, where, if the German plan holds, steel will appear where the ground dips and rises again. The driver rehearses the first displacement by feel. Clutch, short roll, brake, angle, left into the next scallop of cover. They talk in fragments because anything else wastes oxygen and time. When the first shadow hardens into geometry, The commander does not announce it. He gives a range and a permission. The gun speaks once. Before the echo comes back, the hull slides. Inside a Panther, the world is narrower. The commander rides high to keep some horizon, raincoat slick with moisture, binocular cups beating and blurring. The driver is working through a low gear to keep torque ready for a sudden push. He can feel the track pulling toward a rut and corrects by habit. The gunner holds center mass on a patch of uncertain distance because he has not yet seen the target clean, and he knows the turret will have to move hard if anything appears where it should not. Radio chatter nags in his left ear. Instructions that make sense when maps are flat and the sun is dry. The moment the first shell hits somewhere too close, he finds the wall of his own turret with a shoulder as the driver instinctively drops the nose and hunts for an exit that may not exist. The second American shot arrives from a place they did not expect. The commander ducks, then stands again, because sitting feels like surrender. At the command post of Combat Command A, Col Bruce Clarke listens without looking up. The map is under a plastic sheet, pins in small clusters around road names that mean something today and nothing tomorrow. He pays attention to the part of each report that speaks to momentum. A company that still has its ammo-ready rack intact, a platoon that has to pause to hand-carry fuel cans, a road that's holding, a culvert that is soft. He does not need the adjective. He needs the verb. Shift. Hold. Bound. He pushes a company left by 2 fields and takes a breath through his teeth when the battery commander promises a concentration on the far track in 3 minutes. The first crash of shells arrives when he expects it, not because the shells are obedient but because the schedule is. The staff works around him without comment. The only conversation that matters runs through the guns and the engines. Gen Hasso von Manteuffel reads reports in a room that smells faintly of coal and wet wool. He knows what Panzer battalions should be capable of on a crisp day with clear lanes and practiced crews. He folds one sheet and places it parallel to another because that is how his mind arranges an attack that has not yet found its form. Fuel figures and ammunition balances arrive with a raw honesty he cannot ignore. He points at the map where the Americans have gained a small rise and says to the staff officer nearest him that the blow must come here, with weight, before the fog lifts enough to give the enemy an air picture. The officer nods, writes, and leaves. Manteuffel does not indulge in irritation with weather. He adjusts to it. What he cannot adjust is the minute-by-minute loss of formation when blind crews bump hedges, lose bearings, and arrive in sequence at a fight that punishes sequence. 19 September, a tank company, under Lieutenant Col Creighton Abrams, breaks the morning into drills. The commander of a second platoon keeps an ear half on the net and half on his crew. The gunner says "on" when the reticle settles. The loader says "up" when the round is seated. The driver hears nothing but the commander's hand, tap twice on the cupola ring, and then catches the feel of the hull lurch as the shot goes. He backs, turns, slides, and the gun crosses the hedge cut again, angling to the place where, if the first hit has done its work, a second target will show a fraction too much side. 2 tanks down the line, a forward observer whispers a correction to bring bursts 7 seconds later on the road behind the Panther's last position. The Americans do not wait to see if the fire is beautiful. They move. On the German side, a platoon leader in the 111th Panzer Brigade retunes his set and calls for the vehicles behind to close up. He thinks in terms of the terrain he knows, a road that should be clear, a ridge he can reach in one push, a field that is probably not mined. What he receives is a pattern he does not recognize. Shells fall behind him to trap the column. Shots come from his right when the flashes were just seen to his front. When he orders a pivot, the turret crawls against the demand of urgency because machines obey physics, not fear. His gunner gets a bright target at last, a line where a Sherman shows enough silhouette to tempt a shot. He takes it and misses because the moment has passed already. He tries to breathe slowly through the next command. The driver asks a question he cannot answer. The commander tells him to go forward because stopping feels like offering the tank to the ground. Night again, a hedgerow west of Luneville. The company that fought all day has its tanks tucked into shadow. Crews pull ammunition out of trucks by hand, passing rounds along a human chain that swaps jokes without laughter. A sergeant from the armored infantry sits on a track and eats from a can with his gloves still on. He watches the platoon leader write a new set of positions on a grease pencil map. The radio net is quiet enough for men to hear the metal contract as engines cool. The plan for morning is simple, only because complexity fails under fog. 2 fallback scrapes per gun, 1 reserve section ready to slide where the first return fires come heaviest, a battery prepared to move its aim by a field's width on the word of the forward observer and not the rank of the man who asks. A Panther crew beds down inside their hulls because there is nowhere else to go. The loader stretches and touches steel in 3 directions at once. The commander cleans his glasses, folds the cloth, and returns it to a pocket that smells of oil. He knows tomorrow will ask him to make the same choices with less information. He knows the American companies will move when they shoot, and that his own formation will struggle to remain a formation at all. He does not dwell on it. He makes his list fuel, ammunition, bearings, and closes his eyes. Morning will measure both sides by the same rule: who turns a minute into ground, and who lets a minute turn into loss. In this fight, men do not narrate heroics. They count distances between hedges, listen for track squeal that says a pivot has gone too far, measure the space between the shot and the move. The rituals are human because survival prefers habit. Speed is a habit. Mobility is a habit. The crews who live make those habits visible only in what does not happen. Shells that land where the tanks were, guns that traverse toward targets already gone, plans that age faster than the day. 25 July, 1944. The breach at St. Lo gives the Americans a form to follow. Do not stop at the hole you made. Widen it with movement. From that morning through September, the doctrine is applied with discipline rather than slogans. First, infantry and engineers create the aperture. Then armor and armored infantry pass through on assigned lanes, skirting hard points, aiming for road nets and bridgeheads that decide where the next hour's fighting can even occur. Artillery schedules are built backward from contact. Reconnaissance elements map hedgerow cuts and reverse slopes and mark them A, B, and C, so that a platoon knows not only where to fire first, but where to be when the enemy finally registers the ground it just left. 1 August 1944 at noon, Third Army stands up under Lieutenant Gen. George S. Patton, Jr., and the procedures get standardized across corps. Traffic control points at bridges like Pontaubault turn a breakout into a flow problem solved by military police and strict march tables. Duevside Corps, under Maj. Gen. Manton S. Eddy and XX Corps, under Maj. Gen. Walton Walker, divide the operating picture. One pushes toward Nancy and the Moselle crossings, the other pressures Metz and its approaches. The order tree shrinks at the point of contact. A company commander gets authority to slide a platoon 2 fields left without waiting for explanatory paragraphs. Ranks are spoken once. Thereafter, roles and units carry the message. The economy of words becomes speed. Late August, the rear matches the front. The Red Ball Express starts running on 25 August, and tempo gains a fuel line. One-way routes, priority loads for gasoline and ammunition, and turnaround times written on boards rather than in prose keep columns moving at night. The connection to the front is exact. If a tank company expects to fight at dawn, it must receive fuel by midnight and ammunition before first light. Engineers keep culverts serviceable and throw temporary bridges where the grid demands. Recovery vehicles pull casualties off the route, and maintenance crews swap components fast enough to return a vehicle to the column before the next checkpoint. None of this wins a fight alone. All of it prevents a formation from being fixed simply because it is thirsty. Early September, the Moselle crossings give the clearest picture of how doctrine, engineering, and artillery combine into mobility. XII Corps identifies sites where bridging can go in under fog and out of easy observation. The 80th Infantry Division secures the near banks and the first streets of Nancy's approaches. Engineers lash pontoons and lay decking, while forward observers establish line of sight to the roads that feed German counterattacks. When armor moves, it moves into a plan that has a time attached to each fire mission. Time on target shells from multiple batteries arriving within seconds turns a road behind a German probe into a bad place to be at exactly the moment it must be used. The bridges are not statements. They are mechanisms for putting companies onto ground that was artillery scoped before dawn. The American way of command and control at this stage is built for friction. Radio nets are kept narrow, with handovers rehearsed so that a platoon firing goes quiet while the next speaks. A target engaged from position A is not engaged again from position A. The assumption is that the enemy will always shoot at the last place the muzzle flash was seen. Drivers learn displacement distances by feel. Gunners keep reticles on hedgerow cuts rather than horizons. Loaders stage rounds where the hand expects to find them without looking. The vertical stabilizer does not create miracles, but on short bounds it turns a hull-down scrape into a momentary firing position rather than a place to linger. Artillery batteries accept corrections from forward observers close to the armor, not from the rank with the most authority in the net. The result is that a company becomes a clock with several hands, each moving when the other completes a sweep. Across the line, the German solution in Lorraine is the Panzer Brigade, rebuilt in 1944. Panthers up front, a promise of shock, carried in armor and gun. Under clear skies, and with rehearsed crews, the concept has logic. In September, around Nancy and Arracourt, the prerequisites are missing. The brigades 111th and 113th assemble fast, with crews that have not trained long together. Reconnaissance is thin. The weather cuts sight lines into fragments. Command and control is competent on paper and increasingly brittle in practice as fog and American artillery change waypoints into guesses. Gen. Hasso von Manteuffel understands momentum and commits weight as he receives it, but the arrivals do not align cleanly. What should be a synchronized blow becomes a series of good tanks entering fights already shaped by pre-plotted fire and American lateral movement. From 18 to 23 September around Arracourt, the American template repeats with variations adjusted to each field. Company level, Bandichuen. Fire and displacement prevents registration. A platoon shoots, yields the net, and slides 30 to 50 meters to a second scrape behind a thin hedge or a low rise. The sister platoon takes the next engagement. Forward observers stitch a belt of concentrations behind the likely German lines of approach. When a Panther crests into view, its danger is real. Its immediate problem is that the road it used becomes the point of aim for shells already in the air. The attempt to mass is punished not at the first tank but at the third and fourth, where the column is forced to bunch or to detour into ground chosen by someone else an hour earlier. The German response seeks to restore the advantage of range and frontal armor. Under fog, range compresses. Frontal armor is not the angle most often presented as vehicles pivot through hedgerow cuts and along orchard edges. Turret rotation and crew coordination fine, under clear, deliberate conditions, are taxed when targets move laterally at short notice and emit fewer clues. Radio discipline strains under the pressure of simultaneous reports and urgent requests for fire. Batteries struggle to adjust quickly enough to hit American positions that do not hold for more than a minute. Fuel rationing turns marches into calculations where a push that fails must also consider how to withdraw without abandoning vehicles to recovery teams that may not come. Production capacity matters in the background for both sides, but in this window it explains tempo, not destiny. The Americans can keep units topped off with spares and replacements sufficiently that a company goes out with enough runners to execute its plan the next morning. The Germans can field new Panthers, but crews arrive without the repetitions that make short bounds natural. A vehicle that is perfectly capable at a kilometer cannot exploit that advantage when Lorraine offers half that distance and when the first angle at which it is seen is poor. Maintenance and recovery differ in scale. American armored recovery vehicles and shop trucks keep the deadweight off the roads that matter, and that alone protects the schedule by which companies are told where to be at first light. Decision cycles decide what armor and artillery can only enable. At Nancy, the sequence reconnaissance, engineers, infantry, armor, artillery overlays, runs quickly enough that the crossings remain open and usable. Around Arracourt, the American cycle inside a fog-bound battlefield is a minute or two from shot to move to new shot. The German cycle in the same conditions is longer, not from lack of courage or equipment, but from a plan that needs formation to express itself, and a morning where formation is the first thing the ground and the shells take away. When Clarke tells a company to shift 2 fields, it is there before the brigade staff on the other side can adjust fires to where it had been. When Abrams tells a battalion to hold a line as a concept rather than a fence, platoons treat hedges and rises as transient tools, not positions to own. The limits are real. The American columns stretch supply lines and feel the pinch when weather, road damage, or misrouted convoys delay fuel. Close air support is muted in morning fog, making artillery and company movement carry the burden. German anti-tank guns in clearings and on long fields remain lethal where the terrain allows, and when American companies misjudge a crest, the payment is immediate. But the system that Patton's army runs doctrine reduced to behaviors, logistics timed to behaviors, authority shaped to keep behaviors moving, absorbs those limits without giving away the hour. By 24-29 September, German counterblows retain sharp edges and still kill when they land, yet assembly times slip outside the window where fog and surprise can serve them. The Americans do not break the enemy with a single set piece. They fracture him by forcing each brigade to fight as a line of arrivals, each met by companies that have already planned where to be after the first minute. The Moselle crossings continue to feed forward. Red Ball convoys continue to arrive. Artillery continues to answer to the observer closest to the problem. The result is not a myth of invincibility, but a record of procedures executed on time in bad weather against good equipment that could not keep pace. Logistics chose where mobility could become shock. 18 September, 1944. The first German thrusts in the Arracourt sector appear out of a fog that squeezes the battlefield into hedgerow widths and orchard edges. Panthers of the 111th Panzer Brigade push toward the American salients in expectation of a break-in and a roll-up to the Moselle. They meet a defense that does not stand still long enough to be broken. Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division sits hull down in thin scrapes. Guns laid on likely cuts. Artillery fired by schedule rather than emotion. A Panther shows, draws a shot, and the American position goes silent as the vehicles slide 30 yards along the hedge and reappear at a new angle. Shells fall on the place the muzzle flash had been. The next flash is elsewhere. The opening attacks lose rhythm, not because the tanks are unfit, but because the fight demands a minute-by-minute formation that the fog and the shells will not allow. 19 September. Gen. Hasso von Manteuffel seeks weight and tempo, pressing the brigade to keep contact and push through. The ground offers broad, shallow folds that reward whoever chooses the crest line first. American forward observers have already plotted concentrations behind the approach roads. When Panthers crest, the road behind them becomes a poor place to be. The crews are competent and the guns are strong, but the fight is not at the ranges those guns prefer. It is fought at distances where a tank seen in turn is a flank, and where a turret that rotates properly on paper rotates too slowly for a target that moves in short bounds. Clarke's companies trade firing positions by prearranged scrapes. Abrams keeps the battalion tight on the net and light on its feet. The German thrusts are real and dangerous as they land. They loosen as soon as they need a second minute to align. 2023, September, the 113th Panzer Brigade and elements of the 11th Panzer Division attempt to correct toward Luneville and the fields south and east of Arracourt. The intent is to mass, bite, and exploit. The result is a series of arrivals. Under the fog, assembly areas shrink, time slips, and columns find each other late or not at all. A German company secures a lane and crests into American guns that have already fired from positions A and B and are now firing from C. A second German company is minutes behind and meets artillery at the junction that was clear when the first company passed. On the American side, the handover is mechanical. A platoon fires and goes quiet on the net, while the sister platoon speaks and fires. The battery shifts by a field's width on the word of the observer. Crews on both sides work hard. The side that finishes each small task seconds earlier owns the next angle. The myth at risk is not that Panthers cannot be killed. Everyone understands that tanks die. The myth is that frontal armor and long guns guarantee the initiative wherever they appear. In Lorraine's Weather and Ground, initiative belongs to the unit that moves after it shoots and can keep doing so across a morning. German plans assume clear lanes, practiced reconnaissance, and fire support that catches up at the moment of contact. The brigades have new crews, scattered reconnaissance, and batteries that adjust accurately, but not fast enough to hit positions that do not hold for more than a minute. Radio discipline strains as urgent reports stack up. Fuel is enough for marches and one push, not for a sequence of pivots when the route is blocked. The Panthers that break through do damage. The ones behind meet an intersection turned into a hail of steel by a timetable written before dawn. 24, 26 September counterblows continue with determination. The American line thins to cover breadth and survives by schedule. Companies fight while others refuel. Platoons trade positions by field corners rather than towns. Artillery moves its sheaf in small bites to deny the Germans a clean deployment. German leaders seek to impose shape, turn the skirmish line into a wedge, the wedge into a roll-up. The fog allows approach. It also lets defenders shift, unseen, by hedgerow lengths that matter. On maps, the plan remains sound. Pressure here, exploit there. On the ground, the exploitation is late by minutes that cannot be bought back. By the time a second wave reaches the lip of a bowl, the first wave's wrecks and the shelling behind them have stolen the space needed to deploy. 27, 29 September. The tempo of attack ebbs as fuel and crews wear thin. The Americans have not solved the enemy. They have solved their own procedures under the weather they were given. Red Ball fuel and ammunition reach the forward units, often enough that the next morning's plan survives contact with the clock. Maintenance keeps runners in the line. Company commanders continue to treat positions as moments, not places, and to accept that a good angle held too long becomes a bad address. German formations still kill when they find what they can see. The difficulty is finding it in time and arriving in mass before the clock turns the geometry again. The brigades do not disintegrate. They disperse into fights that no longer connect. The inflection is a set of small truths that add up. Range is a promise only if visibility cooperates. Armor is a comfort only if the angle remains frontal. Command works only if arrivals are simultaneous. American doctrine converts those conditions into uncertainties for the other side. Shorten range with fog and folds. Attack angles with lateral movement. Break simultaneity with pre-planned artillery behind the point. The German answer, strike fast with strong tanks, is sound in theory and sometimes in practice, just not often enough in the minutes available each morning. The Moselle crossings stand. Nancy stays supplied. The salients hold their shape. No grand turn is claimed. No war is decided. A set of expectations about what German armor can compel has been brought into line with what the ground and the clock permit. By Lorraine, the myth of German armor was moving slower than the fight. By the end of September 1944, the map around Nancy and Arracourt looked ordinary. Hedges, lanes, low ridges, villages with church spires and tight streets. What mattered was less visible. Third Army held its bridgeheads and road nets east of the Moselle. The German intent to shove the armored salients back across the river had not been achieved. Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division rotated companies through fresh scrapes and fuel points, and the Red Bull convoys kept enough gasoline and ammunition moving forward that morning. Plans still had meaning at first light. The American advantage did not read as a single triumph. It read as a schedule that survived contact. For the Germans, the immediate result was loss of tempo. The 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades, with elements of 11th Panzer Division, had shown up with hard steel and real intent. But the combination of fog, thin reconnaissance, and artillery pre-plots turned attacks into arrivals that rarely aligned. Hasso von Manteuffel's headquarters adjusted axes and pressed again, yet the minutes between companies were as punishing as any shell burst. Fuel that could start a march did not guarantee a second pivot when the road ahead closed. By the last days of the month, the counterblows lacked the weight to reset the line. The legacy inside the units that fought was procedural. Company commanders treated positions as moments, not ground to be owned. Platoons fired, displaced 30 to 50 yards, and regained angle before the enemy registered the last address. Forward observers worked from a list built before dawn, moving belts of fire behind approach roads to break simultaneity. Engineers kept bridges and culverts serviceable so that speed over ground remained possible when orders demanded it. None of this made armor invulnerable. It made companies harder to find, fix, and finish in the minutes that decided each day. Constraints persisted. Fuel margins were thin. Autumn weather over Lorraine kept close air support inconsistent at the hours commanders wanted it. The concrete and guns around Metz promised a different kind of fight in October. But the stakes of the episode had been met. Speed and mobility, expressed as decision cycles and short bounds, had fractured German attacks at the fields they chose. The next map square was not a promise of easy progress, only of continuity. Ahead lay Metz, where tempo would have to bargain with rain, stone, and deliberate fire.